Some nice music. All right, perfect. Everybody, welcome. Thank you very much for joining. I appreciate you coming in here today. So what we're going to do today is do what we call the Beehive product deep dive. I will be talking for the next hour or so about everything we are building, everything we have today, what the product looks like, how to use it, give you some tips if you are a customer, or just kind of show you some insights if you are a potential partner or customer. Show you what's on the roadmap, meaning what's coming in the next month or two, and then what the vision is. So where we think we can take a product, and we're going to go through a bunch of different parts of the product like that. Feel free to chime in, ask questions at any moment. There's a chat that is open. There's a Q&A that is open. Let's actually make sure the chat works. So there we go, chat works. So you can all chat in and we will get going. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about who we are, just a quick introduction, and talk about product roadmap and vision for those four categories there: physical risk, transition risk, governance, and the actual report. And please let your questions fly throughout. So who are we? My name is Adriel. I'm the founder, one of the founders and the CEO of Beehive. Beehive is what we call an enterprise climate risk management software company, which means we help our customers understand their exposure to natural disasters and transition risks, write TCFD reports, and comply with this law called SB 261 in California. If you're not familiar, SB 261 in California, this is it. You can Google it, but it's a very simple law. It says that by January 1st, 2026, which, as you can see in my countdown here, is 104 days from now, any company that has over $500 million in revenue and does business in California, which is a very low threshold, has to publish this thing called the TCFD report, which is basically, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but 4 sections, 11 questions, a little bit about like what is your exposure to natural disasters and climate risks, how are you dealing with it, do you have good governance? We help you do all of that very quickly in about an hour compared with some consultants who often quote 3, 4 months. So here is how we do that. Let's first talk about physical risks. Oop, very important. I forgot to open up the app. Let's do this really quickly. That's like a key component. How am I supposed to show you the product without opening the app, you know? Silly me, silly me. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's dive into it here. So we're going to talk about physical risk assessments. So what is the problem that we're solving here? So what you need to do for this law and what is just good governance is understanding your exposure to natural disasters today and in the future. That is what is required. And you have to do this across a bunch of disasters, ideally globally, because most companies who care about this are global businesses. And across what's called scenarios, meaning is climate change really bad or is it not so bad, and different time horizons. What does that look like today, 10 years, 30 years? The problem here is that doing what I just described, if you have no context of climate science or modeling, is really, really difficult. You're not going to hire a climate scientist. That'd be crazy for your business, for most businesses. Doing it with consultants totally works. Sometimes they have a climate scientist on staff. Sometimes they like just know where to gather this information from public data sets, which is, but are painful. What they basically provide you is not something very data driven, could be very anecdotal, like, oh, since you are in California, maybe wildfires are an issue, or since you are in Florida, maybe hurricanes are an issue. There's even global data sets that say because you're in Spain, maybe hurricanes are an issue, or because you're in Australia, maybe wildfires are an issue. So not even region specific, but truly country specific. Specific being a generous word there. So that's the problem. So what is the product? We provide you with what is we call an auditable risk assessment in seconds. So here's what that looks like. Our customers can enter thousands of assets into the software all at once. An asset is anything with an address. And what you do is you come in here, you can create facilities, things in your supply chain, or people in teams. So the employees for any one of these, you come in, download a CSV and template if you have a lot of them, or do just a manual entry. We can just call this test office number 7, board number 2. Let's do number 7. I think I have a lot of test offices here. I always like to search a random address. Something always pops up here. There we go. Let's see what this area of Patterson, Washington is like. And we can say that I own it. There we go. So that's that. And then you can filter in here. So you might be able to say, hey, I just want to see my offices. Great. Here's test office number 7. You get what we call an audit trail about this stuff. So why do we think? Looks like we're showing some, I picked a random office with some high risk here. That risk is from floods. Why is that risk high from floods? Well, it's because we expect that this place is in a high probability flood area today. Let's see how that changes over time. Looks like that grows, so the probability of extreme rainfall relative to historical events grows 25%. So we get this audit trail, which most companies are not going to like dig into and really use necessarily unless you know what you're doing with this information. But this does for teams who are like an internal audit or SEC reporting or finance and used to these like understanding where the data comes from. This provides a lot of transparency. What we can do here is we can fly to see what this looks like in Washington. All right, that makes sense. There you go. I picked a random place, but it's right on the river. That is why risk bears high. It looks like there's some heat wave risk. And this is one way to visualize it. So you can say, all right, great. Like this is where we're on a river, somewhere in Washington. But you might also want to see this in a map. So we say there's flood risk that is high. Great. There we go. That makes sense. You can see actually the flood model that we have follows this river. So along the river, flood risk is high. It looks like it's much higher where that river gets wider, as you can see here. This is another wide part of the river, so that's why it's high. And then these there were narrow parts. There's some places where risk is a little bit lower. We can see how that looks across the entire country. And you can do this across different disaster types. You can do the same thing for wildfires in Asia. Cyclones are probably more interesting in Asia, but here's this visual map of cyclones in Asia. So what this allows you to do is basically say, what is my world? Like, what does my business look like globally? Where do I have offices? Or where do I have factories? Or where do I have data centers? Or where do I have employees? And where do I only have employees where risk from cyclones is medium or high? Or risk from flooding is medium or high. And you're able to see this stuff automatically and then get this visual view to say, hey, I want to understand, this. So some customers might say, we're planning a new office, right? We're expanding into India. What should I be aware of? We're for whatever reason, geographically, politically, who knows, we're looking at an office in this region of India. Great. Like, what risks should I expect in this region of India? It looks like that's flood risk, that's cyclone risk, a little lower on the west side than on the east side of India. This is wildfire risk, so not particularly high here. So then that lets your office team plan for things like this. Now, what this all allows you to do is just in terms like bringing it back to the simple stuff, in terms of complying with this law with SB 261, a lot of what I just described is very fancy. There's no rule that says you have to have a map that shows all these risks. And there's no rule that says you need to do this for every geographic, plot on the world. What we're trying to do here is to say, we made it so easy to be able to do that because there's no cost per asset. You don't pay extra for every pin you put in. It all is available globally, so you can see this for any geography in the world, basically. It's so easy, you might as well do a really good job here and then get some of those internal audit controls and context to do that good job. There's a couple of other things that are useful here. So some of this is actually new. So what is new? We do this once a month. So I see some of you here have been on last month's presentation. So what is new here is South America. We didn't have South America before, and we just launched it. You can see wildfires are a big area, especially in this very forested region. You'll probably see the same thing in heat. There you go. So big patches of heat waves happening over here. Actually, crazy story about heat. I met with the largest data center operator in Brazil. So I think they operate like 500 different data centers. And they had a crazy year in which, or maybe it was 1 month, in which back to back, they had a heat wave in northern Brazil that knocked out power to a data center. And if you remember these stories, I think it was a year ago, they had insane floods along the coast here in southern Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, outside of Rio de Janeiro, that also knocked out a data center. And the floods were so bad in this area that their like engineers couldn't even get to the data center because all the cities were flooded. And so there were huge, huge problems for this business, and that happened back to back. What you can do with a risk assessment is understand where those problems are likely, and then say, great, do I have the right process in place to do this? So South America is new. That's been very useful. Many of our customers have like offices in Chile or sales offices, so that's been great. The other thing that's new is what you do need to do for this report is basically acknowledge that management and your board has reviewed these risks. And now management and your board does not want to go into a map like this. Management and your board does not want to go into a table like this. This is not what they need to see, even if you could filter it, even if you say only show me the ones that have high risks. Great. Like there's 163 things here. This is a messy way to see this. What management and your board wants to see is reports. They want to see, they want to know that you did the work and they need the most important information. So you have embedded reports in here where you can answer questions like what percentage of my data centers in North America, example, maybe I don't have any data centers there, uh, have high risks from these different disasters, or high and medium risk from these different disasters, or how did that change in 30 years? Or if I just want to know the absolute number of those things, or if I'm focused more on offices. So you're able to basically get all that information immediately. And so what you would do as a customer is basically upload all those assets, get that risk assessment, and then you're immediately ready to share this with your executives and say, hey, enterprise risk team or board or management team, here's where we have risk. It is, let me clear all this here. Um, yeah, most of our risk comes from heat waves. Most of our assets that are at high risk come from heat waves, followed by cyclones, followed by floods. If you want to understand that geographically, you can say, hey, in which state do I have assets with high heat waves? Look like it's New York, Florida, Texas. But I'm just focused on my offices because that's what my facilities manager wants to see, or on factories because that's what my head of factory, whatever the title is, would want to see. What about data centers is very common with like heads of IT and chief technology officers to understand which data centers are exposed, especially to heat waves, because that is super relevant for them. Great, there's one in Texas. What about globally? Looks like India in my demo account here has two, and the US has one. So that allows you to like do this real risk assessment. And again, most importantly here, for those who just care about complying with this law, is you immediately have the report that you need to show to your executives. And you can screenshot this, export it, and say, hey, executive, like, please be aware we did this risk assessment. Here's our finding. And then you can go on and do other stuff. So that's new. The other thing you can do here that's new and I'm very, very excited about is quantify risk. And so this is not required for this initial version of the law because California is doing a lighter version, but this is likely to be implemented in the next iteration of California's requirements because it already is how the way the law works in other countries like Australia, the UK, and the EU, that you have to quantify risk in dollar terms. And if anybody has done submitted to CDP, there you also should be quantifying risk to get a higher score. And traditionally, the way you put a dollar value on risk is really complicated. It really is very difficult to do, long consulting project. We made that embedded, very easy, and then again, like ready for an internal audit to give you the tools. And so the way you're able to do this, and again, if you just care about compliance like this year to make this stuff go away, you probably don't need to spend time here. But if you actually want to understand the magnitude of these risks, or if you're getting ready for European or Australian regulations or California round two in 2027, this will be relevant too. So what you can do in here is come in here and say automatically, what is my dollars at risk? What asset brings me most of that risk? In what country is that? From what hazard? How does that change from floods versus cyclones versus heat waves? How does that look across countries? Where you can see this chart creates that. How does that change over time? So in 10 years, I'm expecting $13 million of flood risk. I guess whatever. That demo count is kind of the same across all these. Looks like heat wave increases a little bit. So you're able to do all that. Again, filter. What if I just care about North American data centers or, global offices and specifically care about heat and wildfire, whatever. You can kind of get this however you want. And I want to show you two things here that are particularly relevant. So your first question is like, how do we get this number? How did we decide that there's $21 million in total risk? Well, the way you do that is you come into the settings page, you go into risk parameters and into financial impact settings. And so this is where you begin to set up both the equations and how to calculate that risk. So again, this is where your finance team comes in, where your audit team comes in to say, hey, $21 million, that's a big number. How'd you get that? And so you have the tools here to actually come in and say, hey, if an employee loses a workday, what does that cost the business in continuity? Is that $1,000 a day? Is that $400 a day? Whatever you want. If an office closes, is that, a major issue and it's $20,000 a day? You really not care and everyone works from home, so it doesn't really matter and it's $1,000 a day? What about if a data center goes down? Are you a tech company, so you actually have huge costs per hour that your data center is down? Or are you I don't know, like a plumbing company or data centers? You have a data center, I guess, to store some files, but it doesn't really matter. And you don't really care if a data center goes down. Whatever you do, you can control these numbers. And then you can go in, and these are all kind of set defaults to say, how dangerous or how problematic are wildfires to our employees, or wildfires to our offices, or wildfires to our data centers? Because you might come in here and say, you know what, like a wildfire near my data center, that's high risk. That could be a huge issue. And a heat wave, that's also a really big issue because that'd be really expensive. But you know what? We feel really prepared against floods. And we feel like we have really good policies there. So we don't think those are high risk. And as you change all these numbers, you're going to see this impact calculator adjust right away. Obviously, it went way down because I think I made the data center per hour thing $5 instead of $500,000. But you're able to see all that and get transparency into like what that score is. So that's the first thing that's really useful is the ability to like adjust the risk parameters of these calculations, which give you and your team the ability and the control over these things. The last thing I want to show you on quantification is the following step around like auditability and better understanding this stuff. Software always has limitations, right? You gotta click buttons, and we're gonna try to design every button we can, but it's impossible. But you can also export this data. I'm gonna make this number a little bigger just so it's a little more interesting. Let's go here, here. Let's add parameters, and then call that 500,000 again. There we go, save settings. Okay, now we'll come back here. We're gonna export this. And so what this looks like when you export is, again, this gives you the ability to run this through an internal audit process, to run this through somebody who doesn't want to be in the software, to basically get this validated by somebody, and to play with this elsewhere. So you're able to say, hey, how do we calculate risk to employees? Well, this was the equation we used: cost per lost workday times lost workdays per day. And you can play right in here. What if you want to change this to $10,000 per lost workday or $100 per lost workday? You see this number adjusting. Um, here's the number of employees that you actually have at different risk levels from wildfires and from floods. And here's the total number of employees who have high risk or medium risk. If I change this, right, if I say all of a sudden, whatever you change the numbers here, there's 50 employees at high wildfire risk, you saw that number adjust. So you're able to do this stuff really quickly in here, and this export makes it really easy for you to get an audit, for you to understand what numbers you're disclosing. And again, just to reiterate, for like this first California compliance rule, you do not need to disclose any dollar figures. But as you really try to bring this in-house into your enterprise risk management process, you obviously want numbers to talk about internally. And then as you prepare for round two of California, and for those of you doing Europe or Australia, you will need to disclose some version of numbers, at least like, does it reach materiality or not? So we take this very complicated consulting project and we give you the tools to put it in your hands. The very last thing I want to show you that is new, right? I think that's, yeah, there you go. Very last thing I want to show you that is new on here, for those who haven't seen it last time, is embedded AI. So sometimes it can be like, you might have to look through the data to find what you find. So, all right, we found that 79 assets are at high risk of floods. Then we got to go to the assets table and find those 79 assets and do that way. But we've embedded AI in here so that you can actually search for specific examples, or like ask specific questions rather about your data, and find those answers inside the software. So this AI here is something we're investing a ton into, so you can basically pull out that information much faster. And this is really just for like information gathering. If you want to understand the risk to a certain asset, you could say like, which of my offices is at the highest risk from any hazard in the 30-year time frame, SSP5. whatever. Well, let's see what happens. And SSP5, we didn't talk about this much, but the SSPs are called socioeconomic pathways. Basically, SSP5 means climate change is really bad and there's a lot of global warming. SSP1 means we acted really well and there's less. So this is the highest version. So whatever, you can get your answers here. So cool. That is the AI. I'm going to pause there on that stuff. I'll talk about the roadmap um, and more vision stuff in a minute. But any questions? Okay. I'll keep going until I see a question. So what's coming in the roadmap? So the first is drought. So right now, the four, I could have done there. The four hazards that we have are wildfire, floods, heat, and cyclones. We'll be adding drought very soon. I see Stuart asked that we cover Central America. Yeah, I believe we do. I think if you, yeah, so Mexico and the islands here are covered under the North America button, and then South America covers the rest of it there. So Central America is covered that way. We are trying to, it'll be a few months. We're going to unite this into one global view probably. So you can just click like risk map and that shows you the whole world of wildfires or of floods instead of just one geography at a time. So we'll get to that over time. Um, so yeah, we're gonna add drought. That should be coming in a week or two. That is really water scarcity drought, very important for anyone who uses data centers because that is a huge cost factor. Very important for anybody in food or agriculture. There's a few areas where it's really valuable. We are also, this is going to be a big one, going to work on the next part of our kind of roadmap here is what we call quarterly planning. I need a nice sip of coffee. We're going to talk a lot about this one. So the goal of this whole process, the goal of TCFD, the goal of California's regulation, the goal of climate risk management, all anyone is saying is we want you to integrate this into your enterprise risk management process and treat it the same way you treat other risks like cybersecurity risk or competitive risk or geopolitical risk. I don't think this should be special, meaning if there's no risk, you really shouldn't spend much time on it. And if it's really high risk, it shouldn't be bad to do because it's politicized. Like all we're saying is that sometimes natural disasters are a problem and you need a good way to manage that risk. And sometimes they're not going to be a huge problem for you because you're a fully remote distributed software company with zero assets. Sometimes there's going to be a surprising problem even then. Maybe a data center goes down unexpectedly. Maybe you have executives who live in high risk areas who can't work for a week if a rich part of LA burns. Or maybe you are a very asset intensive business like real estate or restaurants. And when your business closes down because of a hurricane, that really hurts the business. Problem with integrating it into ERM today is that it is very time consuming, expensive, and specialized to really understand what risks exist and how they're evolving, how they impact you. And everything we've done here, even on the quantifying stuff, this is like a hypothetical assessment, right? It's you input your assets and we're saying hypothetically, this is where wildfires are bad. And hypothetically, if a heat wave hit, you'd lose this much money predominantly from your data centers, like all hypotheticals. And those are fine. It's a good risk assessment to start, but it's not actionable enough. So what we are beginning to build out will look a little bit like this. You can tell it's a very ugly design, but this is going to be a big focus over the next few months. And if you keep coming to these every month, you'll see this improve quite a bit. What you want to do is every quarter, just like you have other risk management meetings every quarter and your ERM team gets together and discusses competitive risks or cybersecurity risks or whatever, excuse me, or political policy risk, you want to come every quarter with the real relevant data to discuss climate risk. And what that will look like in Beehive is the following. You will be able to say, hey, for next quarter or next month or whatever custom time frame you want, what disasters are most likely to happen? And if they did happen, because they've happened in previous years, how much would I lose? Who would get hurt? And am I prepared? So you'll be able to come in here and say, hey, for this time period, this random next quarter, I'm planning ahead for start first quarter of the year. What is likely? Well, it looks like the most likely thing is wildfires in California. followed by cyclones in Southeast US and cyclones Northern Australia. And you'll be able to come in here and for any one of these, say, how much money might I lose if wildfire did happen in the areas in California that I have? Which of my assets would be affected? And give me some proof that this has happened. And so it'll show you historical events that have happened in those areas where you have assets. I'll give you context to that. So you'll be able to say, hey, here's events that happen. I'm not making this up. This isn't a theoretical projection. This fire happened in this area and it would have cost this much money. It maybe did cost this much money to the economy, or maybe it would have cost me this much money if I had the assets I have today in that area. So this gives you the tool to actually assess this risk. And again, if you decide that $4 million is immaterial, just not a big enough thing, then all right, great. Like move on. I don't think you should stress out about it. But if you decide this is a really big number, or maybe if it's a little number, but you have a lot of employees in that area, right? In this particular example, I have a lot of employees um, here. Then maybe you want to do something about employee health and safety. Maybe you want to make sure everyone's got the right training to evacuate the office when they need if something happens, or to keep their home safe, or to make sure they have good insurance, or to run business continuity plan and say, hey, like our whole sales team is in Australia. If something terrible happens there, do we have a good process to move all those sales calls to our Indian office, whatever? So you're able to like do some real planning here. So this is going to be a huge, huge, huge part of our work over the next 6 months and the next year to basically allow you to have this quarterly structured, rigorous enterprise climate risk management program at your company. And then again, when you publish your next TCFD report, Beehive, and we'll get to this in a bit, but we'll know all that and include the fact that you have a good rigorous program with quarterly reviews and good audit trails in your report. So happy to answer any questions there. Won't talk much about the vision. The vision, basically, what we go beyond that is like, there's a disaster happening right now. Let's trigger the responses we've all agreed you should trigger. That's far away, but that's kind of where we want Beehive to go, is to basically be your disaster response and preparedness planning software that just also is tied into all these regulations. Okay, cool. Happy to come back to any of this if folks have questions. So let's talk about transition risks and opportunities. So what you need to do for this regulation is understand your transition risks and opportunities. And a good way to think about that is basically what risks or opportunities exist to your business in an economy impacted by climate change. So climate change happens. How does the law change in places? How does the market shift in places? What reputational damage might you have? What opportunities could come up as the world responds to this? How is your business positioned? The goal of all this is to give investors this transparent information to know you're thinking about it, just like your other risk matrix that you might put into a 10K. The problem with how transition risks work today is, if you're working with a consultant, is it is very time consuming and it's very, very qualitative. Meaning the way it works is the consultant will line up a bunch of interviews with their executives. Yeah, they can meet 5, 10 executives. Scheduling calls with 5, 10 executives takes a few months. That takes 5, 10 hours of your team's time. They run all these interviews and they ask your CMO and your COO and your head of IT, hey, what risks or opportunities do you think are relevant to us in an economy impacted by climate change? And your CMO or COO or head of IT, who's never thought about this stuff in their life, now has to come up with answers about what risks or opportunities they think are relevant. And that doesn't always lead to anything particularly useful because they haven't thought about this stuff. So what we do is give you an immediate AI-driven transition risk assessment. And this is very new. So for those who saw this before, I'm very excited about this. What you saw before is basically just a library of risks. Like here's dozens of transition risks or opportunities that could be relevant to report on. And then we would select those risks and those risks would pop up here. You also saw, if you joined last time, I think we had launched this some benchmarking. So you'd be able to say, all right, this risk of there's a cost to transition to lower emissions technology, blah, blah. of a relevant risk. Like, does that even make sense? Well, here's other companies that have said similar things: increasing technology costs, cost transition technology, technology shifts, technology risks. Like, here's how other companies that you recognize have reported on this. Great. So I'm very excited because this literally launched like last night, and we're still working out some bugs here, but it'll be working fine for some customers on Monday. It's the startup life. What you're going to be able to do now is actually run an AI driven assessment of transition risks that is incredibly transparent and actually provides you a lot of value. So it's that takes that long time frame to actually do this assessment, condenses it into a minute, and gives you a lot of transparency and tools to say, all right, great, what risks should exist or not. And so I'm not going to go through the whole workflow because there's a bunch of stuff that happens in the background here. But I see a few customers on here, so I'll show it to y'all soon. What it basically does says, all right, cool. Like, here's what we know about your company. Here's your peers. Here's your business. Here's some reports that we have that we're going to feed to the AI. Maybe some more information. So, like, we have a net zero target, whatever. Or get. So here's some other stuff here. And then the AI is going to start coming up again. It won't work because I've done this already. But the AI is going to start coming up with risks and opportunities for your review. And now what you'll be able to do beyond that is see the AI's logic, understand why it came up with one thing or another, give it like adjust it and have it ready for your disclosure. And we help our clients with all this so you're not just like left to do the stuff that you don't know. So basically it takes like long, time consuming qualitative process. And we don't necessarily make it more quantitative, but we do make it immediate and give you a lot of transparency into the logic all written out. So it makes it very useful. And there's a lot of really, really cool stuff that we're going to be doing here. So I'm very excited about that. What's on the roadmap is benchmarking. So more benchmarking, I should say. So, I showed you that for any one of these risks, you can click in here and you can see how other peers have reported similar things. That's cool. And you can even see like, here's a risk, like 18 companies we have 18 examples of companies that have reported this, 15 that have reported that. So if the AI says this one, you could be like, oh yeah, I'm in good company here. Like a lot of companies just like me have reported it. Great. Well, we want to build an AI benchmarking tool very similar to what I showed you in the physical risks. We'd be able to ask questions like, what risks has my biggest competitor um, mentioned that I have not? Or what risks am I mentioning that none of my peers have? Or what are the three most common risks across my peer group? Ask like some of those like data manipulation questions that we just don't like. It would just be too difficult to build out the software for. It's one of those things you can do with AI so you can benchmark really well. So we want to build that out, and that's probably something we're going to try to do over the course of October and November. So I'm very excited about that. All right. And the vision is too far away, so we won't go much into that. All right. Keep coming with questions as you have them. Let's talk about governance. So governance are the first two questions of the TCFD report. The first question is, what is your board's oversight of these risks? The second question is, what is management's oversight over climate risk? So governance is super, super important. Setting this stuff up is really complicated, confusing. Like you haven't done this stuff before for the most part. And so how do we do that? What you can do in here, and this has not evolved much since we built it first, it's very straightforward. You set up what committees exist. So what board committees do you have? What management level committees do you have? Who does or does not have climate risk oversight? And then who's on those committees? So what titles are on those committees? What board members are on those committees? Basically organize all that. And then you say, how often do they meet? Do they meet quarterly, as a monthly, is it as needed? Whatever it is. And so you set that all up and you send us the information and we set that up for you. And now this is going to flow directly into your disclosure, which we'll talk about next. But it basically allows you to say, who should even be in charge of this? Like, what is the right grouping to think about? And you put that in here. And then where this is going to go, and I'll show you this stuff in a minute. Actually, where this is going to go is these same reviews that you conducted regularly are going to probably pop out of there. So if you tell us in here that your next ESG steering committee, let's move this in the future, your next ESG steering committee is whatever, October 22nd here. we will tell you on, maybe a week before on October 15th, hey, in preparation for that meeting, let's come in here and let's pull the risk report for, October 22nd through January 22nd and see what risks are likely to exist in that period of time. And then you have something to come to that meeting with. So that'd be really cool. The other thing we do is right now this is out of the software, but part of the roadmap is to bring it into the software, is you need to present this stuff to your board. Like your board should be aware that you've done this for the California law. That is anything from a check the box of just make your board aware of it. All the way through, they might have a lot of questions. They might want to review this and really understand which risks are most material, especially if you found some high dollar amounts. So we just made it easy to have that presentation. So we basically have this template where you can take it, turn it into your own branding, and then have something ready to present to your board. This would obviously be all of your information, all of your risks and opportunities, and you're ready to bring to your board. So just try and make it easy for you to even communicate this stuff to your board. So again, right now we do this off the platform. So we work with a customer, you tell us when your next board meeting is. We take all your information out of the software and we put it into this format for you. And then you probably change it, design it, make it ready for the board. Eventually, this will be done in the software directly, so you'll be able to come in here, export report, um, and then have it ready for the board, like export board report, and then it's ready for the board. So that's what's happening around governance. Um, Great. Let's talk about the report. This is the last step here. So again, what is required for this law for SB 261, like we talked about, is this TCFD aligned report. They say any successor there too. Technically, the modern name for the TCFD is the IFRS S2, but that's detailed. And what these reports look like, we have this TCFD library here on our website. Anybody can see. You'll see dozens of different reports, but they all look fairly similar. Like if we go to what's a good example here, like Toast. If we go to Toast, you'll see they have these 4 sections and 11 questions. They have governance, strategy, risk management, metrics and targets, and they have 11 questions among them all. So this is like what you need to disclose, your version of this. And they all look really similar. I guess Pinterest, same thing, governance, strategy, uh, risk management, metrics and targets, 4 sections, 11 questions. Now, the problem here is that writing this stuff takes some expertise and time. Either takes expertise, like you could do it in house, it's not rocket science, but you got to kind of know the framework and the details and read a bunch of these things. And even if you are really good at it, even if you're a super smart consultant who's been doing this forever, it just takes time to put fingers on keyboard and consolidate all this information. There's a benchmarking that is a really important part of this flow, right? Y'all who are in public reporting know that benchmarking is a huge effort and it's something you really, really invest in. And so this is just something that takes a lot of manual work. Like, what you would probably do. I don't think anything like this TCFG library exists elsewhere. We built this, but you're welcome to. If you come in here, you say, hey, I'm in the automotive industry or I'm in the finance industry or whatever. What are some companies? I could be automotive. What are some companies in my industry that have reported in this way? All right. Well, what did First Advantage say? Oh, got it. It's their sustainability report. I got to find their TCFD section. It's probably in the appendix somewhere. Like you'd be going through all this policies. There you go. So you'd find this, and then you'd copy. This is tiny. You copy paste this, put this into a PowerPoint deck, and compare your answers to the answers. Whatever. Very difficult. Pain in the butt. Not rocket science, but pain in the butt. What Beehive does for you is we draft your full report for you immediately. And the way we do that is we have a bunch of AI prompts that are all sitting behind this to pull relevant information out of the risk assessments that we did, or the governance stuff you set up, out of other disclosure documents that you've given us, and it drafts your report for you. And the value here is you don't really care if it's AI or if it's a monkey on the keyboard hitting the perfect letters, or if it's a consultant for the world's biggest firm. You don't really care. You need a report that you need a draft that you can go off of and edit. And so this gives you that draft. I'm going to delete this because I have so many. But the way the process works is AI writes that first draft for you. We go ahead and make a couple edits and recommendations that maybe your legal team or your investor relations team or someone else on the team will review this stuff, and then you'll be ready to disclose it. So you can run all those version controls in here, go back and forth and say, actually, I like this old version more than this new version, whatever. So that makes it really easy. Yeah, you can if you like this version, great, restore this version, and that's the version that'll pop up in your summary report over here. Or if your legal team goes, that version's terrible, I'm going to restore this version. Great, now you see this version popping up there. Whatever you do though, the benchmarking being embedded is really what's useful here. So you can see that we set up your peers. You kind of see the peers come up top, and then there's other things by industry. You set up your peers in the settings. We can see how all your peers have answered any of these questions. So if US Bank is a core peer of yours, you say, how did US Bank answer this question, or this question, or this question, or this question? And if you like really want context, you click see full disclosure, and you go to their full disclosure around TCFD. So that gives you that ability to benchmark right in here. So the way the process works is for our clients, we draft the first thing using AI, and then we go in there and just make some edits and make sure it didn't say anything silly. And based on what we know about you, just massage it a little bit, give you some help there. Then by the end of it, you have your summary report. You'll see all those transition risks that I showed you are all embedded in here, and everything's really well organized and in that 4 section 11 question template. What most companies you could do is just export this as a PDF and voila, you're done. You have your report. Great. What you're probably going to do is export this as a Google Doc and then show that to your legal team who probably didn't want to go into the software, or show that to like your anyone doing final revisions who just didn't feel like going into the software. Which I welcome you all. It's we don't charge per user, but whatever. Some people don't like new softwares. You'll export it as a regular Google Doc, and then you'll be able to do some final design on it. Right. If you click on any of these reports, you can see they're very pretty. Even the very simple ones like Pinterest, which is shockingly simple because you think Pinterest would make theirs beautiful. It's not very ugly. It's not just this black and white document. This black and white document obviously is good enough for compliance, but most companies want to do. This looks maybe almost too much like a 10K without the need. Most companies, we click on a random one here. Let's see, whoever did. Yeah, it's a little pretty, right? So you'll probably want to make yours a little bit pretty. So that's that. And then the roadmap, embedding more AI into this process. So again, the benchmarking thing, I gave you that example in transition risk, but maybe you want to say, tell me all the ways in which I'm different from my peers, or tell me all the ways in which Asana's disclosure, HubSpot's disclosure is better than my disclosure. You can do that. Or eventually want to build an AI that's going to give you feedback. So you might say, this is probably better for more junior people, but you might say, like, give me feedback as if you are my CFO. And the AI will say, well, you don't use enough numbers, or please double check that number. Give me feedback as if you are, my head of ESG and you want to be a leader in this stuff. Oh, well, we could be more transparent. We could be quantitative. We can talk about these programs. Give me feedback as if you are my general counsel and you're very conservative about this stuff. Oh, we're saying too much. You should think about removing that. So that's kind of stuff is on the roadmap for later this year or early next. And what that final output, after it's all said and done, looks like, just to give you a couple of examples of actual clients who have published their reports here, is the Asana. This is their report. You see very similar framework to us. RRI drafted it. They talked about this enterprise risk management software. That's us. They did this assessment in here. And then they obviously made their design a little bit pretty and improved all of it. Another example is Valvoline. They did something interesting, which was very similar. So same box, a little prettier than ours, but they actually brought in their quantification that they did into here. They were really specific. So they talked about what percentage of stores are in high risk areas from flooding, what percentage of stores are in high risk areas from wildfires. So very transparent there. Okay, that's a lot. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of that stuff. If you are thinking about complying with California climate disclosures, if you're a consultant on here who wants to help your clients use the software, you can reach out um, and we can speak directly. Also, just as a note, as you guys think of any questions you'd like to do, we do this webinar basically every week, or a webinar pretty much every week. Next week, we're taking off for for New York Climate Week. So we are skipping that one, but in a couple weeks, we have this awesome event with Simone Wren from New Relic, who's our head of ESG, and she can talk about how she builds New Relic's program. And then if you just want to stay updated on our work, in 5 weeks or so, we are running this product training again, and you'll see everything that's new. And then we'll put out another. We got some holidays and conferences in between, but almost every week we try. Right. Uh, I'm happy to answer any questions about anything we've gone over or anything we haven't here in the last couple minutes. I'm gonna wait one more minute until 2:50 Eastern time, and then I'll say goodbye if there are no questions. Okay, we'll call it a day. I appreciate everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Hope this was useful. You'll get the recording very shortly, and I hope to see you soon. Bye, everyone.